When Rand asked if I could speak on the future of capitalism, at first I was excited. And I started to think about the things I would say, and it created an anxiousness in me, an anxiousness which I'm feeling today. In a few minutes, it'll be consumed by passion. The anxiousness is because it's a topic that pertains to all of us in this room. It's hard to imagine that it doesn't. And because it matters so much to me. When we look at the future of capitalism, the first thing I think about is how will we continue to develop capitalism? But in order to continue to develop this great system, we have found ourselves in a situation where we must also preserve it. Because capitalism seems to be at the center of some of the world's greatest culture wars today. In fact, it's one of the primary challenges that we face today. And in the language that we've been hearing about, we have the opportunity to deny that this is even a challenge. I ask that you open your mind to that because it is so apparent before me. Even if you believe it's a challenge, how many of you have chosen to avoid it? That's somebody else's problem. I have a business to run. I have other things. I can't have an impact. This challenge has created a divisiveness in this world and continues to create a polarization. Yet even in the presence of polarized society that we experience today, I believe in the goodness and the beauty of humanity. We got to see just a touch of that with Rick as you were present with him, and he called you to get in touch with some of that beauty. In addition to this goodness and beauty, I believe that humanity is progressing in an extremely positive direction. I believe the systems which promote freedom and promote choice are the greatest accelerators of this human progress. And I believe that free market capitalism is the most powerful system for social cooperation and for human progress ever conceived. Please don't confuse capitalism as simply an economic system. It is both a social and a moral system as well. Social because it requires us to interact, and moral because it is voluntary. As I searched for a metaphor to represent this progress, the staircase landed on me. Although it is forever progressing upward, the staircase itself recognizes that the progress is not always in a straight line. Secondly, the staircase is built upon a solid foundation of the levels before it. Without those levels, the system collapses. As we take a look at history, at least recent history of these systems, we start 1,000 years ago in this history taking a look at tribalism. It was the predominant system at the time, even though there were other examples. There were just under 300 million people. They gathered in relatively smaller communities for their common good. They were focused on survival, food, protection, companionship, and it was mainly a very flat society, very little hierarchy. Several hundred years later, feudalism started to emerge. As these groups became larger, the need for power and control became more necessary. It enabled them to provide protection and keep order. But the first hierarchy in a two-tier system emerged, where the vast majority of the people lived in some sort of oppression, pure slavery, serfdom, or indentured servitude. As this elite group became more extensive across the world, there was a desire for exotic goods, and as that increased, for luxury, it created a class of people between this elite and the indentured, which participated in this trade, and then emerged the very thin and small middle class. But with the emergence of the middle class, that small, thin, it gave hope to people and the realization that you could move fluidly between these classes. It created a wide continuum of social and economic structure. The population boomed from 1 billion to today 8 billion in the last 200 years. And as we look at some of the progress that we had over this 1,000 years, whether it's life expectancy, whether it's extreme poverty, whether it is literacy, there was no major progress until capitalism emerged. Look at the stats up here. Most of you, if not all of you, would not even be alive today. Only 10% of you would not live in extreme poverty. Not poverty, extreme poverty. And only 12% of you could read and write. Today, the numbers are astounding. Two events happened in 1776. March of 1776, Adam Smith released The Wealth of Nations, the beacon of free market capitalism. In August of 1776, the Declaration of Independence was signed, and it became the beacon of freedom. As we zoom into capitalism too, it has continued to develop. Two main forms exist today. They overlap. I couldn't do that in the slides here, but there's a system of classic capitalism that has existed for about 250 years. And then stakeholder capitalism has more recently emerged in the last 50 years or so. One has a modern perspective or worldview, the orange worldview. The other has a postmodern, the green worldview, at the center of its being. One has a responsibility. Classic capitalism is a responsibility to the shareholder. This is actually a moral responsibility in classic capitalism to the shareholder. Stakeholder capitalism recognizes the goodness and the need for something beyond that, a greater ecosystem that we got to hear about as stakeholders. They both have their light and shadow. We heard a little bit about this at previous reunion. But when we take this thin slice through capitalism and look at the light, the very foundation, the staircase of classic capitalism, it is based on a meritocracy. That your hard work can produce real results for you. That your creativity can do the same and so on. It is based on voluntary exchange. Rewarding risk, but allowing failure to occur. We have seen the shadows, and classic capitalism has had the time to actually start seeing its own shadows. Undeniable greed, the collapse of Enron, self-interest, exploitation of people, harm to the environment. It's hard to deny when, let's say in Cleveland, the entire river's on fire because of pollutants. And that is one of the benefits that classic capitalism has had, is the time to see its own shadows. When we start to look at the light, the noble light of stakeholder capitalism, the concept of inclusivity, creating more opportunity for more people, the sensitivity to marginalized communities, and this awareness that I think each of you probably have of environmental impact of our choices. These are great things. I hope that everybody here aspires to these things. But it too comes with its shadows. It's also, I believe, has not had the time in this bright light of inclusivity and sensitivity and awareness of environmental impact to really see its own shadows. Coercion being at the center of that. There's a natural human tendency to push back when somebody pushes you or forces you into something. There is a tendency to push back. Coercion reduces freedom and choice. And this last one, for maybe some of you that are peak green, might get some ire. Equality of outcomes is a shadow. Why do I claim that it's a shadow? Because it attacks the foundational light of one of its previous steps in the spiral. Because there is no meritocracy in an environment of equality of outcomes. And as I look at this tension between classic and stakeholder capitalism, there is the great thesis that came around about 250 years ago. And as it created wake, some of it was wonderful, some of it deplorable. The antithesis of that has shown up, and I'm glad it's shown up. I hope you're glad it's shown up. This antithesis tried to fix what was wrong, and that's such a noble desire. Yet in doing so, as I mentioned, it has created its shadow, trying to destroy the foundation of classic capitalism. And classic capitalism has now found itself, instead of also trying to fix what is wrong, protecting what is right about it. And I do not choose these words right and wrong without a sense of mindfulness. But I am very hopeful. I think that when we look at this and we see the core values that are being represented, the core value of freedom in classic capitalism, the core value of equality in stakeholder capitalism. While equality might be more divisive today, just sit in the goodness of that word and feel the goodness of that word. But this is the foundational source of our culture war today. This came up a little bit early, but I'll go through this. I don't want you to hear what I'm saying as some justification of the orange mindset to justify some of those shadows that were created in classic capitalism. We can't. They're deplorable. I don't want you to hear this as an indictment of some of the postmodern views of capitalism. It's neither. This is a call for something greater, for an acceptance of the dynamic tension that exists between these concepts of equality and freedom. Because nature smiles at the union of freedom and of equality in our utopias. For freedom and equality are the sworn and everlasting enemies, and when one prevails, the other dies. This is a polarity. If you disagree, give this concept a chance. Try not to be a knower and try to live into this statement. That something greater is a synthesis of classic and stakeholder capitalism. It is something that I believe conscious capitalism represents. Conscious capitalism is the synthesis of these two things. It is built upon a concept of preserve and negate. Do not confuse this with transcend and include. There are subtle differences and important ones. I do not have the desire to include the deep and darkest shadows of any. These are things that we must choose to negate. Yet we must preserve the thing. And I talked about classic capitalism. It's had 250 years to see its shadows, some of them undeniable. That's putting the mirror up and you can't even deny them, they're so deplorable. We have to have the discernment to realize it is unwise to kill the foundation that our feet is built upon. The whole staircase could come tumbling down. And as we explore this dynamic tension between these two wonderful qualities of equality and freedom, I believe that our society that puts equality before freedom will get neither. A society that puts freedom, however, before equality will get a high degree of both. This is not an or because we don't want one or the other. It kills the other when we have the or. It's a simple recognition and wisdom to realize at times we must prioritize. When you look at human progress and you looked at that 1,000 years, we had equality and no freedom. We had it. I am glad those days are behind us. We need to inspire to be even more. And this is where we find ourselves today. This is the development of capitalism, one that suspends our own righteousness, the righteousness of the modern mindset and worldview, and the righteousness of the postmodern. Instead, transcending, trying to get above this, suspending our own righteousness, wherever that may be. We have come so far. Yet, I believe we can aspire to even more. The answer to the shadows, the deplorable shadows of classic capitalism is not socialism. It is simply that socialism is a path to misery. And as history has proven, will return back to capitalism. It is the longest path to capitalism. So while I don't know what is beyond conscious capitalism, I also know that socialism is not the answer. And this is the challenge before us. If it's not in this room, I literally get anxious and I'm passionate. If it's not this room, who is it going to be? Who? In a state of unawareness, we might deny that this challenge exists. Maybe in a state of awareness, we deny that this challenge exists. But possibly in a moment of awareness, we get a greater choice. One, because we're afraid. I'm a little bit afraid right now. We can avoid it altogether. Avoid this responsibility. Or perhaps, in our moment of courage, I can find others besides myself to choose and to accept this challenge. The challenge of not only preserving, but developing the most powerful system for social cooperation and for human progress that humanity has ever created. Thank you.